a book by Sayyid Mustapha Lari, I believe. It's
The Seal of the Prophets and His Message.
yeah, and he addresses the concept of infallibility over there. Brother Hussein, you had a question regarding a number of verses. So
Yes.
could you take a few minutes of explain exactly how you meant these verses to be relevant to our conversation?
Okay, let's see. So there was one verse that I had found in Surah Muhammad, verse 19. فاعلم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فاعلم أنه لا إله إلا الله واستغفر لذنبك وللمؤمنين etc. So I think ذنبك, if it is referring to the Prophet, what does this mean? That was one verse. Another one was Surah Al-Tahrim, the first verse, يا أيها النبي لما تحرم ما أحل الله لك. So perhaps asking why, maybe a verse seeming to say, even if it's not a sin, that the Prophet did something that God is not questioning why he did it. Another Surah Al-Anfal, verse 27, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, يا بني آدم لا يفتننكم الشيطان كما أخرج أبويكم من الجنة. So I don't have the translation here, but pretty much saying that it was Shaitan who caused the two parents to be expelled from the Jannah. So, could they? How could it not be a sin if they followed the dictates of Shaitan or his recommendation? I believe. Oh, and Surah Al-Fath. The second verse, ليغفر لك الله ما تقدم من ذنبك وما تأخر. It is translated, I believe, as saying that so that God may forgive those sins of the past and that which is to come, something like that. That's how they translate it. And I believe those are the only verses that I had brought up, those four.
Okay, so how would you respond? Anybody.
Which one? All of the verses?
Just generally. You see, those who propose counter-argument to the notion of infallibility of the Prophet, particularly our own Prophet, the argument is presented on two levels. Either in a kind of philosophical argument or approach or using verses in the Holy Quran that appear to be indicating that the Holy Prophet either committed sins or they had shortcomings or they were forgetful, etc., etc. The philosophical or the more theological argument starts with this. They say that Ma'soom and the infallible person, there are two possibilities for the infallible person. Either he has or she has the power to commit sin and not do wajibs, or they don't. If they don't have the power, then it is their infallibility is not the type of infallibility that we are looking for. It's infallibility which comes as a predestined. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them this opportunity or has made them that way. And as a consequence, if we were to look at them if we accept this, that they were, and that was the argument that the sister, what is her name, sister? So yes, that was that they are uniquely created, and this infallibility is part of this unique creation. Immediately, the response would be: if they are uniquely created, they cannot become the role model for us, because how can the faith present these individuals to be the role model for us if intrinsically they are incapable of committing sin and they are totally different, so they cannot become the role model. But if the answer is yes, that they are capable in principle, then is it possible for them to commit sins or not? Capability is something, possibility of the other. If you say no, again, it leads the whole argument, similar kind of argument. If there is no possibility, it's not going to make them much different from those whom, in principle, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created that way. If the possibility of sin exists, they are like everybody else, so there is nothing unique about them. This notion of infallibility is nothing that we can, if they can commit sins like everybody else. This is not the concept of infallibility that we are looking for. Infallibility is something, and this is the whole confusion that takes place within the argument, that they think infallibility is a unique character that removes human agency from committing sins. The fact that they are unique, it's not because their power and agency has been removed. It's because they have been practicing, or they have endeavored or struggled or jihad to the point where if they were to be put in a situation of sin and disobedience, they are willingly not prepared to commit it. There's a huge difference between somehow they were to be stripped of the power and the agency to commit sin, which then moves towards the irrelevancy of their asma and infallibility for us, and the way the Shia presents it, that no, it's not a unique, or at least one reading of the literature. But this is the theological part. Let's go to the question that appearance of a number of verses indicate that there might be some kind of osyan, sahw, mistakes, forgetfulness, and so on. But what Brother Hussein cited were just few of them. I mean, the story of creation and the Genesis with the Prophet Adam starts from there. One could argue that the fact that Prophet Adam was, and by the way, Brother Hussein sent me a text of a book translated by Marhum Mutahari, Brother Hussein was saying that the language used in the book was too strong against Prophet Adam for his failure or whatever. How do we interpret it? So some people actually start the critique from there. They say, فَعَصَى, there is a verse in the Holy Quran that clearly states that they disobeyed. And even when it comes to asking Allah for forgiveness, قَالَ رَبُّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا, we indeed were unjust, or not, they didn't do justice to ourselves. So how can we interpret this? Now, let's see. From the literature that you read.
Should I read it? Because I don't
Yes.
know if I sent it. There was one little clipping from a book called The Theory of Knowledge and Islamic Perspective by Shahid al-Tahari. And he says on page 15, Adam alayhi salam was expelled for one reason, and that was because he went beyond humanness, Adamiyya. In spite of all this knowledge and gnosis, he was subjected to his desires, he was enchained by greed, he was captivated by insinuation and covetousness. He was told, here is the place of man, and Adam became unmanly, and so fell down from paradise. Adam did not act according to the dictates of his knowledge and cognizance. Knowledge gives worldview, worldview in turn gives ideology, and ideology requires action. And then he makes this quotation, I think he paraphrases, trying to maybe hypothetically speak for Adam. He says, I am Adam. I know all the truths. This I know shows the world to me in a particular way, and since I look at the world in that way, it follows then that I have knowledge of the do's and don'ts, yet I did not look at the do's and don'ts. I did not act responsibly. And I think he continues, but just stopped at that short clipping.
Mm-hmm. So how do we respond? You are arguing for the isma of, or infallibility of the, say, and by the way, you cannot argue for the isma of Ahlul Bayt unless you establish the isma of the Holy Prophet. Because the theological argument rests on the isma of the Holy Prophet first, and then you use his identification and his statement, his consent, as a proof to bring the isma of Ahlul Bayt to it. So how do we go about establishing the isma of Ahlul Bayt, the Holy Prophet, in the light of the critique that some people have regarding the few verses in the Holy Quran?
I remember in Adab al-Salah, Imam Khomeini says something, uses similar language, and he says, well, his sin is different than our sins, and says something like his was a sin of multiplicity, and then I was lost from there, couldn't understand. So what that means, different from our sins?
I think it means any sin from the Prophet is a sin just because of the nature of being involved in the world. It's inevitable. It's not a punishable sin. What exactly that sin means, I don't know.
Yeah, they use various phrases, tarkul awla, which means it's not a sin. There is disobedience of Allah could be due to the clear command of wujub and hurma, istihbab and kiraha, or awlawiyya or adam al-awlawiyya, which means better or not better. If you were to follow this order, it was better for you, in the sense that it would have kept you in a totally different environment. If you were not to follow this order, it would be different for you, because now you have to move into a different environment rather than a clear command of obligation, and which brings in disobedience and the context of sinfulness that we believe. And this to a degree links to the argument we had regarding the linguistic and the use of it, in the sense that language fails to express a number of issues, and particularly the distinction between what was it, this command in the sense of command for Adam, and what difference would that command meant for ordinary mortals like us. But this is an argument, but we need to go to a different kind of discussion. But for the sake of argument, let's focus on what Brother Hussein has and a number of other theologians have clearly identified, verses in the Holy Quran. I alluded last week to the story of Adam, to a story of Yaqub, to a story of Yusuf, to a story of Moses, and a number of other stories that we have, that the text clearly, Nuh alayhi salam, for example, that the text is clear, at least the appearance of the text is clear, indicating it seems to be a clear disobedience or some kind of sinfulness taking place, or a shortcomings.
Did this occur before he declared his prophethood or after?
Well, one group of people make a distinction between before and after. Shia theologians claim that isma has to be right from the beginning. They cannot, sinful individuals cannot become the role model because sinfulness has some kind of a spiritual effect in the individual, and the fact that that person becomes the role model for everybody else is not acceptable. So one, people say before and after as a way out of the crisis or the conundrum of the appearance of the verse.
So one meaning of sin could be that you willfully, even though you had the knowledge, you did not follow. The other type of sin, which is not punishable, is with all the knowledge that you had, you made the best choice, which with more knowledge you could have made a better choice. So it's not punishable sin, and there's no effect in spirituality in any way.
If there was no guidance, no clear instruction, that argument would have been relevant. Where it was left to human intellect to decide for himself or herself. And in the best available information, you make the best or the right choices. But when there is a command, فَلَا تَقْرَبَا هَذَا الشَّجَرَةَ, don't go close to this tree, the notion that you still have that freedom of choice to accept or reject is the gist of the argument here. If you believe either you have to interpret this command in a particular manner, this is why tarkul awla, they say, a particular manner that you do not mean from it a clear command of hurma and wujub, which is a clear command of obligation and say none for wujub and prohibition for hurma. If you do it that way, that's one interpretation. That the command, but it is far-fetched. It's very difficult really to say. Then we have to go into the context and the linguistic. Are there any qara'in or signs in the itlaq of the generality of the statement that clearly implies this or not? And this is a debate that has been, if you look at various exegesis and mufassirin of Quran, when it comes to this asyan, they have discussed it. Those who locate themselves in the theological kind of position that we do accept sinfulness from the prophets, either before, if not after, they appeal to the appearance of the text as it is. Those who locate themselves on this unique continuum on the side that they claim the prophets have to be infallible, then they have the gymnastic starts of how do we fuse and synthesize this absolute theological principle that we need with what appears to be straightforward. It says sin. And this is why they go through the itlaq, metaphorical use, various degrees about the prophet, etc., etc. But any argument, I mean, we can see what kind of argument Sayyid Lari, for example, proposes as a counter-argument for these asma, for these verses. And last week I alluded to the fact وَنَادَى نُوحٌ رَبَّهُ فَقَالَ رَبَّ ابْنِ مِنْ أَهْلِي وَإِنَّ وَعْدَكَ الْحَقُّ وَأَنْتَ أَحْكَمُ الْحَاكِمِينَ قَالَ يَا نُوحْ إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ. The fact that he asks Allah to protect his son, and then Allah says, no, he is not part of your family. Where, by the way, people who redefined the concept of ummah and interpreted based on similarities of values and norms and goals rather than purely submission to a particular faith. This is one of the verses that they use. But فَلَا تَسْأَلْنَ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ. You shouldn't ask me anything that you really are not familiar and you don't understand. Is this a shortcoming for the Prophet? And then he apologizes for asking such a question. وَإِلَّا تَغْفِرْ لِي وَتَرْحَمْنِي أَكُنْ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ.
The previous prophets already have a shortcoming because they haven't reached the highest level of perfection.
That's a different story. Not reaching the highest level of perfection, but acting within what they were capable and submitting to the command of Allah the way they had the capability, according to the capability they had. That is what we expect from them. The story of Prophet Ibrahim, for example, when he asks Allah to show him how he resurrects things. أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ قَالَ بَلَى وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئَنَّ قَلْبِي. There is an inner desire to know more. That's a clear indication that the level has not reached that higher level. But within that level that they were capable of, did they submit to the best of their ability to the command of Allah and not committed sin? That's all what we expect from them. So in essence, Asma becomes various levels. To act according to the best of your knowledge, which we go back to the Brother Hussein and the book of Marhum Mutahari. Your knowledge, which he calls shanacht, understanding, is the higher and the more complicated or sophisticated that it is, you have more obligation on you to submit accordingly, because the various steps that Marhum Mutahari talks, shanacht or understanding, ultimately creates ideology, ideology creates commitment, commitment necessitates action. This action according to that understanding and perception. If the perception is low naturally, some people mystics have moved towards that interpretation of Prophet Adam. That the early example of creation wasn't in the level of, say, Amir al-Mu'mineen Salatullah Wasalam alayhi, that says, لَوْ انْكَشَفَ الْغَطَاءَ مَزْدَدْتُ يَقِينًا. If all the veils are to be removed, not an iota of my knowledge will be increased. This is a higher level. This is why there is another hadith from the Holy Prophet that says, عُلَمَاءُ أُمَّتِي أَفْضَلْ مِنْ أَنْبِيَاء بَنِي إِسْرَائِيل. It alludes to this hierarchical knowledge and in-depth understanding of reality. Not all of them, but at least the window is open. So the Asma, we would say, despite the limited understanding that they had, did they act according to that or not? If they did, that's all we need to prove.
They acted towards their capacity.
Yes, that's what we have to prove. So if they acted within their capacity, the use of the word asa, which means asyan and disobedience, is it a metaphorical use? Simply implying that they really could not understand beyond the level that they were in. The classic example becomes the relationship between Prophet Musa and Khidr. They had two different understandings of reality. One was legalistic, what is permissible or not permissible. This is the law. How can you kill a child that has not committed any sins? The other one responds, this is a command of Allah, looking ahead as a consequence of a good deed that the parents have done. We did not want this child to grow up. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, didn't want for this child to grow and become a menace in the life of two obedient parents. That's a totally different knowledge and different structure. This is why Khidr, right from the beginning, says, You cannot follow me and behave in exactly the way I behave, because you don't understand it. Was this shortcoming that sometimes the Quran refers to as asyan or disobedience due to lack of understanding? Or no, it is a clear violation. They understood that they should not do this, but they still violated. Then comes this notion of what you suggested, that ikhtiyar and free choice and the desire to make best within the information we have. Is it still available, that option, even with the clear instruction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not to do it? فَلَا تَقْرَبَا هَذِهِ الشَّجَرَةِ. It's a clear instruction. Still the free will exists. To the best, I want to make the best choice. And how do we synthesize between freedom or free choice and ikhtiyar and the issue of asma? Does it remove it? Or no, the person is still in full control. Even if you put them in a situation of sin, they still would not commit, not because they are incapable of committing, because they have trained their inner soul and removed themselves. There is a hadith from the Holy Prophet that says, even my nafs ammara can convert it to Islam. It's a metaphorical use. That I am in full control of my nafs ammara, to the point that nafs ammara does not only take me away, follows my command. This is much higher level of asma or understanding, because humans fall when they permit nafs ammara to take control. This tughyan that takes place, disobedience, is due to control of nafs ammara. If you struggle, and this is the mystics' opinion, if you struggle and you really have full control of nafs ammara, that comes through stages. You reach a point that your life embodies Allah's desire and command in everything that you do. Then you become the true abd, and the person that submits to the command of Allah, where God-centric becomes a nature of human being. We don't do anything before we think. And sometimes, even if we are put in a situation of sin, Prophet Yusuf was put in a situation of sin. He resisted. قَالَ مَعَاذَ اللَّهِ. I'm not going to do it, despite the fact that all the opportunity was available. For such a person to understand this, when he reaches, after a few years in prison, asks somebody else to intervene for his release. This is a failure. It may not be a failure for our mortal souls under normal condition, but the more elevated you become in the spirituality, it becomes a failure. So how do we interpret asyan in the case of Adam, the case of Nuh, in the case of Musa with the killing of somebody and then asking for forgiveness, in the case of Yusuf, and few others, and in few of the verses that Brother Hussein read that clearly indicates.
Can we use Nabi Adam alayhi salam's experience in Jannah? We look at his experience in Jannah and to see whether we can use him as a model for us, or we can only look at his experience while he's in the world to see if he is a model for us or not.
What is the difference between the two experiences?
So you mentioned that when one goes through struggle, there reaches a point that necessitates protection from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Did Adam go through any struggle in Jannah? Did he receive, is there different forms of protection? Is there any protection that comes as a result of his struggle in Jannah? Seems like two very different environments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What do you think? There are claims or assertions that Allah intended eventually for Adam to come out of Jannah and go to earth. Because as long as Adam remained in heaven, he would not have become Khalifatullah and the image and the manifestation or the embodiment of Allah's attribute of Kamal and Jamal, because it was a unique environment created for him. He or she, Hawa, they didn't do anything. You become Khalifatullah, the vicegerent, the embodiment of Sifat al-Kamal and Jamal when you do it through struggle. The intent was ultimately for Adam to move out. But whether the situation that was created was such that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended it for it, or it was a different environment that Allah wanted him for this gradual move to take place. He speeded up the process. Any ideas?
Assuming that it was a mistake that Adam committed in the Jannah, assuming it was a mistake, if he could make that mistake there without all of the veils, then how can he deserve to be a prophet in a world where there are all of the veils that make it the situation even worse?
Well, one could argue, again, devil's advocate, one could argue that going through that process gave him the realization that becoming or embodying the characters of the Sifat of Jamal and Kamal, the intended position, he has to struggle. By itself was a realization call. That his life, that you cannot reach that position by simply remaining stagnant. This is what Marhum Mutahari alludes to. That when he uses this various steps, understanding creates ideology, ideology creates X, and X creates action. So this kind of chain of or steps moving from lower level to higher level was not clear for him in that time. Once he came to earth with a clear command of now becoming a prophet, he becomes the role model for those who follow him, at least for his immediate family. And people who say that certainly, I mean, there is a debate between, there's a couple of articles, I'll try to find them, between Marhum Allama, somebody has drawn a parallel between Fakhr Razi's interpretation of Asma and Marhum Allama Tabatabai's interpretation of Asma. And those who claim that it's totally conceivable to think of sinfulness before prophethood. Because once you make a decision that you intend, once the responsibility is given to you and you make the decision to remain obedient to Allah, that's at this moment, then it's possible to follow this person. But the counter argument is that it's not just the appearance, it's the spirituality to go with it. And as long as you have committed sins, the sinfulness or sin that you have committed have consequences on your spirituality that prevents you to become the perfect example for others to follow, and the role model for others to follow. So the way out of the crisis for some people is to appeal to what mujmal and mutashabih in the verses in the Holy Quran. So certainly it does not make sense, and we don't believe the appearance of the world to be meant, the word itself, Osyan, in the context that we understand it. What is the context that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using it is not something that is clear to us. I mean, a similar kind of thing within Christianity. When you talk to them regarding this, how do you define God being one and at the same time three, the concept of Trinity, they say it's a mystery. The appeal to mystery, because you cannot synthesize between the three realities. Are they one, three independent, emanation? What is it? So when they reach these, there are a number of scholars that simply say it is part of mujmal, unknown or mystical or somehow not clear to us. This is why we refer to a number of ahadith and riwayat from Ahlul Bayt, and we simply try to explain it the way they have said. Nothing more, nothing less. We don't ask any question. In most of these verses that Brother Hussein you cited, the usual, Shia exegesis or mufassirin tend to explain it that it wasn't that he may have been the subject of the conversation, but the direction, the intended individuals were those who are around the Holy Prophet. That if they were to submit to the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the call of the Prophet, then Allah would forgive the previous sins. Not because it was meant to be specifically regarding the Holy Prophet. So that's one way, one interpretation that they would come out of there. There are a number of stories, even Prophet Dawood. So the conclusion that one could draw from it, that Isma has to be a willful act, as a consequence of a willful act. It cannot be imposed. It cannot be selected differently. It cannot be interpreted differently. Because any interpretation that this unique characteristics that these individuals have somehow are different from the rest would prevent or bar them from becoming the role model. When وَلَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنٌ, the best role model. Certainly the generality of the text or the term does not specify whether, going back to the four concepts of Isma that we said, that it is one or the other. It covers all of them. So for this person to become the role model for us in all of these conditions, one need them to be always in control of their faculty and not make mistakes or not commit sin, etc., etc. Not only in the delivery of the message, in explaining the message, in the life that they conduct, and the rest of it. It is as a consequence of a willful act, the full control on their faculty. It's not unique, it's not separate, it's not something that God has created them differently from the beginning. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that these people, through struggle, they are going to go to reach that point from the beginning. But whether Allah's knowledge creates jabr and forces a unique interpretation, that's a different issue that we can debate. It's another theological debate. But certainly it's not. Allah, and to answer the sister's question, at the moment of birth, were they unique or not? Yes, certainly they were unique. They were unique because Allah knew they are going to struggle. But for those who try somehow interpret Allah's knowledge as a way of predestination, no, we argue against it, because otherwise it removes defeats the purpose for them to become the role model for us. Without proving that, so spend some time, please, and go and look at few of these tafasirs regarding various verses that we have that might appear to be a counter-argument to this issue of isma and infallibility within our own theological debate. And because you are going to be asked, if ever the question comes up immediately, the issue of Asyan of Adam and a number of others, including some of these verses, Abasa wa Tawalla, and a number of others, you have to answer all these back. So not only to understand how you contextualize and how you come up with a working definition of Asma, and how do we, from a Shia perspective, present it. The Shia anthology, for example, when it comes to the issue of Prophet, there is a little bit of comments regarding this concept of Isma. Marhum Matari talks about it. Marhum Matari has a book, I think, or an a lecture on the concept of Isma in one of his books. I'll try to find out. But certainly there is a book now, or this article from the translation of that small booklet, which is available. Brother Hussein, if you could send the link to everyone to read it. But to be able to argue succinctly, you really need to be able to understand what are the counter-arguments, how they're going to criticize the whole notion of Isma. And you have to be familiar with various interpretation of these verses from both Shia and Sunni scholars' point of view. Pick up 3 major or 4 major scholars, Sunni scholars say tafsir of Quran, Razi, even contemporary ones, Muhammad Abd, or Fi Dhilal al-Quran al-Qutb, or Sayyid Rida, and others, and pose the question and see how they define it. Where do they locate themselves? Do they accept Asma before, right from the beginning until the end, or would they accept sinfulness before and then Asma to come after? And if it comes after, which of these Asma they would accept and which one they reject? And then you go back into the Shia tafsir and you do the same thing. And then you will be able, if a Shia asks you, okay, what about this? Because some of the youth, unfortunately, these days have become familiar with the counter-argument very quickly because they hear it being presented on the internet and so on, with no knowledge of and background of their own, say, Shia interpretation of it. So it becomes really important for you to pay attention to these and understand various interpretations that we have, and classify the words and the verses that we have in the Holy Quran regarding various prophets. See how do you interpret them.
Which booklet did you ask me to send the group?
The one that you send me a text from it, the translation, Muhammad Bari. The Persian book is called Shanacht, Mas'aleh Shanacht. I think, let me check if I... Yeah. The question of understanding or perception. And the beauty of that small booklet, that it really takes on Western philosophical narrative about this notion of perception. Looks at from both mystical and non-mystical. Here I can... the story of Adam is just one of them. You have Hegel's... first he starts with the mystical and then goes into Kant and Hegel, Spencer, materialistic dialectic materialism, Islamic philosophers, Marxism, Russell, Abu Ali Sina, Khaja Nasruddin, Freud, because these texts were available to the youth in the 1960s and early 1970s in Iran, every book that he wrote, he had to be mindful of the presence of these Western philosophical ideas to address them in a comparison to what Islam, where he and the Muslim philosophers or Shia philosophers located themselves. This is a very small book, but extremely useful for you to have a look. And then ultimately, I believe he moved into the concept of fitra from an Islamic point of view and Nahj al-Balagha. So the scope is very wide and extremely beneficial. Any questions?
Question that I have is, we spoke about the fact that maybe, or we put forward the idea that maybe if the knowledge of the prophets is limited in a way compared to the Prophet Muhammad, for example, whose knowledge is not limited, then that limited knowledge, which is of no fault of their own, can lead them to certain mistakes. If that was the case, though, since they're doing their very best, then how could they ever deserve censure, especially that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best concealer? Also, another point is, there's a point that these verses are brought up in the Quran for us to benefit somehow.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also an issue. I don't know, maybe you could say if they're doing their best, we also know that if we do our best, are we making the same mistakes, or what would the benefit be for us? I don't know.
I don't believe that once we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already chosen these individuals and given them the responsibility to become the guide for the society, so any kind of reprehension that we see it is a metaphorical use to remind them in a sense of the limit. Why was it necessary for an ulul azm Prophet Musa, to be pushed to go through a unique experience with Khidr, for him to understand what? That legalistic approach to life is just part of what Allah intends, but Allah functions in a different domain as well that might be outside the legalistic approach, for him to understand the limitation of his ministry, as to borrow a phrase from Christianity. So that this unique approach to everything legal is not all that is in life. You need to go beyond it. And sometimes some of them are incapable. In the process, there is an evolution process takes place. This morning I was talking about the evolution of culture in the breakfast program that we have here. Can we imagine that there is an essentialist culture, Islamic culture, that existed from the beginning of the history of Islam, and it intends to go to the end of the world? Or what we have is a set of values, norms, universal values and norms, that once they are contextualized or indigenized, and then it becomes a culture. And that lateral space or freedom that we give is necessary for evolution of culture. When the verse calls Ya ayyuhan nas inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'ila lita'arafu, so that you may understand. Understanding means is that you learn from each other, and interaction takes place for overlapping areas to create a unique synthesis now, this time, between what seems to be opposing cultures, as long as shared values and principles exist. So all this exercise to remind Musa that his knowledge and his prophecy is limited. Ulul Azm. So it's not reprehension, it is in a way just to remind them that yes, you did your best within the context, within the limitation, within the constraint of what you knew. Prophet Ibrahim admits at the end, لَكِنْ لِيَطْمَأَنَّ قَلْبِي. There is a huge difference between a prophet, Ulul Azm, founder of a faith, Hanif, monotheistic, etc., etc. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the phrase Khalil, friend, and so on for him. Still, once the story is unpacked in the Holy Quran, it says that he admitted that he still wanted for this heart to settle. So he was a prophet, but the heart was still not reached the level of settlement and equilibrium that is needed, that nothing would shake it. And then you have a prophet that comes according to our own narrative, Prophet of Islam, that even Jibreel says that beyond this point I will burn, I have no comprehension. But it's yours, go ahead. So it's, if a strong language, and this was my answer to you when you send that text to me, if a strong language is being used, it's simply to express the enormity of the challenge that exists. So don't, for us, all of us, not to become arrogant because of what little knowledge that we have, and we think this is the end of the world. To always leave the door open. There is a hadith from Amirul Mu'mineen sallallahu alayhi that says, if only we knew that our knowledge compared to our ignorance is a drop before an ocean. What we know is only a drop before the whole ocean in front of us, which is our ignorance. There is another hadith that says, no matter how hard humans struggle to perfect themselves and move and elevate their intellect, they are only capable of 10%, and one hadith says 1% of the entire knowledge available. 99% or 90% of the knowledge will be still outside their reach until the Imam comes, where through his guidance and with his leadership, now fully under the command of Allah, doors open that go beyond this narrative language of legalistic approach to life. Spirituality comes in and opens the door. So these are examples given even to the prophets in the past. And look at the story of Yusuf. The verse is clear. Because he asked, we kept him in for a few more years. Once you submit, you don't see anybody else. You don't ask anybody else. The biggest miracle in your life has happened. From the well, you have been taken out. And you have lived, now going through the process of breaking. Calamities in human life are nothing more than the shell being broken for potentialities to come up. Marhum Utari used to use this question quite a lot. He says, it's like a walnut. Humans are like walnuts. For the true tree to grow, you need that crust to break. And the only way this crust breaks is when you go through the calamities in life. So there is a purpose to this. And to be reminded at the end that no matter how hard you try, what we are expected to do is to submit to the best of our ability. Nothing more. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا ما سعى. Beyond what he or she is capable is not expected. But certainly we will be questioned when we do not submit, we do not fulfill our duties according to our knowledge. Then retribution is there. Why did you fail? So if the strong language we see in few verses in the Holy Quran, it's just to remind us, the readers, that the relationship has to be based on Islam means submission. True abd and servant, that servitude and the highest level of servitude is reached when you submit completely. When even ikhtiyar, the power of free will, means nothing anymore. The true believer feels happier for Allah to decide for him or her rather than for me to exercise my free will, which no longer exists when you annihilate the nafs and the soul and you see nothing. So it's a unique language being used, not in one hand to let them understand who they are and what are their limitations, but at the same time to remind everybody else, the mortals, that look, you really have nothing, no matter how hard you try, if you think you are the center of gravity in the world. That's the wrong approach. And this is the concept of taqwa, where God becomes the central issue in our life. The force that pulls, that holds, the centripetal force that literally allows everything to run around that center. Once you do it, then you move beyond a certain legalistic, linguistic approach to the understanding of reality. This is why in the context of Sifatullah we talked about mystics, the mystical teachers. They instruct their students to not go beyond certain level of discussion and leave it for the enlightenment to come as you go through the process of soul searching and purification. You will have a better understanding of a reality when it is your heart that understands and settles rather than your brain making sense of it. And it's a difficult challenge, but ultimately that's the position that Allah intended for human being. You don't become Khalifatullah, the image of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth, by simply following a certain command. That's the beginning. But you need to go beyond it. Marhum Imam Rahmatullah alayh, before month of Ramadan, used to give a lecture, Akhir Sha'ban, used to give a lecture on akhlaq, and always encouraged the students that attended those lectures. Everybody most students attended it. Was those of you who are familiar with Najaf, Masjid al-Turk, or Masjid Sheikh Ansari in Suq al-Huwaish was full normally. And he would tell them that use the month of Ramadan as an opportunity to be enlightened, to go beyond the fasting and the prayer and so on, by making sure that light gets into your heart and you come out of it with a different look at life than way you went through and you began the month of Ramadan. So these mystics have different approach to life. Unfortunately, we somehow limit our responsibilities within the prayer, 5 prayer a day, fasting, occasional financial contribution, etc., etc. That's not the whole life. It's probably the beginning.